The heavy scent of midsummer rain and expensive, unfamiliar jasmine perfume was the first thing that alerted Travis Reynolds as he pushed open the weathered oak door of his farmhouse. His 7-year-old daughter, Sophie, asleep against his shoulder, her small backpack dangling from his free hand. He walked down the narrow, wood-paneled hallway, the floorboards groaning softly under his work boots, intending to lay his daughter down on his own bed before starting on their simple dinner of visual inspection logs and boxed macaroni. But as he stepped into the dim, shadow-drenched bedroom, where the afternoon light filtered weakly through the lace curtains, his entire body froze, and his fingers lost their grip on the heavy iron key ring he always carried, sending it clattering against the bare floorboards with a sharp, metallic crash that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. There, curled tightly under his faded plaid quilt, still wearing a torn silk blouse and mud-splattered tailored trousers, lay Caroline Hayes, the brilliant, multi-billion-dollar chief executive officer of Hayes Global, her face pale, her breathing shallow, and her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the blanket in her sleep. The sudden noise of the dropped keys startled her awake, her eyes snapping open with a flash of raw, unadulterated panic as she bolted upright, her manicured hands trembling and her immaculate posture entirely shattered by days of running from a faceless corporate threat. For a long, breathless moment, the powerful executive and the quiet maintenance manager stared at each other across the humble room, the silence stretching between them until Caroline's shoulders finally dropped, her gaze falling to the worn floor as she whispered in a raw, broken voice, asking if she could stay, just for tonight, because she had nowhere else left to go. To find out how a brilliant billionaire executive ended up running for her life and seeking refuge in the home of the unpretentious single father she had publicly ruined, stay until the very end. If these stories of overlooked loyalty, silent sacrifice, and the ultimate triumph of true character over corporate politics speak to your heart, please take a moment to join our community in the comments below, as so many of you watching have lived these very dynamics and understand the profound value of an unsung hero. This story brings to light a deep, unsettling truth about modern life, forcing us to ask whether corporate loyalty has been completely swallowed by corporate greed, and whether the modern institutions we build have entirely forgotten the dedicated, flesh-and-blood workers who laid their very foundations with honest sweat. 14 months earlier, the chaotic, glass-walled headquarters of Hayes Global in downtown Chicago vibrated with a completely different kind of energy, an environment where numbers on a screen dictated human worth, and the physical reality of the business was often treated as an afterthought by the brilliant newcomers running the executive suites. Travis Reynolds worked on the lower levels of that massive apparatus, carrying the title of Senior Facilities Operations Manager, a corporate euphemism for the man who understood every pipe, every automated sorting conveyor, and every backup generator across 32 regional distribution hubs. To the casual observer and to the hyper-educated vice presidents arriving fresh from Ivy League business schools, Travis was simply a quiet man in a dark blue work shirt who spoke rarely, never raised his voice, and spent his days examining mechanical blueprints or walking the concrete floors of the warehouses with a small notebook. They did not know, because he never felt the need to tell them, that 10 years prior, he had been the lead structural design engineer for the very logistics frameworks the entire multi-billion-dollar empire now relied upon. A brilliant career he had deliberately walked away from after a devastating family tragedy left him as the sole caregiver for his infant daughter, Sophie. Choosing a lower status, predictable role with fixed hours was the only way he could ensure he would never miss a bedtime story or a school play, sacrificing his own professional prestige so his daughter could have a present, stable father. High above the warehouse floors in the penthouse executive suite, Caroline Hayes operated under an entirely different set of pressures, carrying the weight of a legacy business that her father had founded but which was now being circled by aggressive shark-like activist investors and a predatory board of directors demanding immediate, unprecedented profit margins. Caroline was a whirlwind of sharp intelligence and high-pressure decision-making, an executive who lived on 4 hours of sleep and expected absolute perfection from everyone around her, leaving her vulnerable to the polished, comforting words of her senior vice president of strategy, Julian Vance. Julian was the epitome of the modern corporate climber, a man who spoke entirely in the bloodless language of synergy, digital optimization, and headcount reduction, always presenting beautifully colored charts that promised massive savings while completely ignoring the physical limitations of the machinery and the human beings operating them. Travis watched from a distance as Julian began systematically dismantling the safety margins and maintenance schedules of the automated distribution hubs, replacing experienced, well-paid mechanical supervisors with cheaper, third-party contractors who looked good on a balance sheet, but didn't know the difference between a failing hydraulic bearing and a routine operational vibration. Travis attempted, through 3 separate, meticulously drafted internal memos, to alert upper management that these extreme cost-cutting measures were creating catastrophic vulnerabilities in the company's core supply chain. But his quiet, technical warnings were buried by the bureaucratic layer Julian had built around the CEO. Caroline, consumed by an upcoming multi-billion-dollar merger that would either secure her family's legacy or destroy it, trusted Julian implicitly, believing his assurances that the operations were running at peak efficiency, and that any complaints from the floor were simply the grumblings of an older, resistant workforce that failed to grasp the speed of the modern digital economy. 5 months would pass before that fragile, over-optimized corporate machine finally encountered a reality that Julian Vance's colorful digital presentations could no longer conceal or explain away. The true breaking point arrived on a freezing Tuesday afternoon in November, during a high-stakes operational review meeting held in the main boardroom of the Chicago headquarters, where the 30-foot mahogany table was surrounded by international investors, board members, and the entire executive leadership team. Julian Vance was in the middle of presenting his quarterly efficiency report, proudly demonstrating how his new outsourced maintenance initiative had saved the company $14 million in overhead, when the massive digital monitors on the wall suddenly flashed red, indicating a complete operational stoppage at the Midwest hub, the central artery of the company's entire logistical network. As panic began to ripple through the room and Julian scrambled to find a polished explanation, Travis Reynolds entered the boardroom quietly, holding a battered tablet displaying live thermal imaging data from the automated sorting lines, his calm presence a stark contrast to the rising tension among the executives. Travis didn't look at the board members. He looked directly at Caroline, explaining in his characteristic even, measured tone that the outsourced contractors had ignored the bearing temperature warnings on the main trunk line for 3 consecutive weeks, and that the entire system had just suffered a catastrophic structural seizure that would halt all shipments across 12 states for days. Julian, his face reddening as he felt his carefully constructed reputation slipping in front of the investors, immediately went on the defensive, using sharp corporate buzzwords to turn the blame back onto Travis, aggressively declaring that a mere floor supervisor was unqualified to diagnose a complex, enterprise-level system failure, and suggesting that Travis's own negligence was the true cause of the breakdown. Caroline, facing intense, silent judgment from the board members whose millions were on the line, let her mounting anxiety and exhaustion dictate her response, turning her sharp, piercing gaze toward Travis and delivering a cold, public dismissal that cut through the room like a blade. She told Travis that she was tired of his constant negativity, his old-fashioned resistance to modern progress, and his inability to work within the innovative structures that Julian had put in place, concluding that Hayes Global needed visionary thinkers, not cautious technicians who could only look for flaws. She demanded that he hand over his access badge and leave the building immediately, choosing to protect Julian's polished corporate narrative rather than acknowledge the uncomfortable truth presented by the man in the blue work shirt. Travis didn't flinch, nor did he offer a defense or raise his voice to match Julian's aggressive tone. He simply placed his tablet quietly on the mahogany table, pulled his security badge from his belt, and walked out of the room with an unshakable dignity that left a heavy, uncomfortable silence in his wake. If you have ever felt completely unseen, undervalued, or pushed aside by a leader who chose to believe a beautiful, polished lie rather than a hard, quiet truth, please share your thoughts in the comments below, as our family here knows exactly how deep those corporate wounds can run. This painful turning point illustrates a dynamic that so many skilled, hardworking people face every day, raising the question of whether modern credentialed newcomers, with all their formal training and fancy degrees, truly understand the blue-collar competence and raw practical experience required to keep the real world turning. Travis returned to his small office on the lower level, packed his few personal items, including a faded, multicolored drawing of a house and a sun that Sophie had made for him when she was 5, and walked out into the cold November rain, leaving behind the company he had helped build from its very infancy. He retreated entirely to his modest 20-acre countryside property located nearly 2 hours outside the city, a quiet sanctuary surrounded by ancient oak trees and rolling hills, where the frantic noise of the corporate world could not reach him or his daughter. For the next several months, Travis focused all of his quiet energy on being the father Sophie deserved, spending his mornings walking her to the local elementary school bus stop, his afternoons working on his old tractor or repairing the structural timber of his barn, and his evenings cooking simple, nutritious meals. He watched his daughter thrive in the clean country air, her laughter filling the rooms of the old farmhouse, and he found a deep, settling peace in his manual labor, entirely content to let the corporate empire that had rejected him fade into a distant, half-forgotten memory. Meanwhile, back in the gleaming towers of the city, the true cost of Caroline's misjudgment was beginning to manifest in ways that no clever accounting or public relations strategy could hide, as the regional distribution hubs began failing one by one under the weight of Julian's neglected maintenance schedules. 4 months would pass before the carefully concealed rot inside the executive suites of Hayes Global would erupt into a crisis that threatened to destroy more than just the company's stock price. In the quiet solitude of her sprawling penthouse office, Caroline Hayes began to feel the heavy, suffocating weight of an unresolved guilt. Her long hours at her desk, now spent staring at a series of terrifying operational discrepancies and unexplained financial anomalies that Julian Vance could no longer smooth over with his charming presentations. She found herself repeatedly opening the archiving system to read through the old, discarded maintenance reports that Travis Reynolds had submitted over the years, realizing with a sickening jolt of clarity that every single systemic failure, every broken conveyor, and every delayed shipment they were now experiencing had been predicted by him with absolute, mathematical precision. The true revelation, however, came from an unexpected source when Elena, a sharp, fiercely independent young data analyst working in the logistics department, requested a private, off-the-record meeting with Caroline outside the office, bringing along an encrypted flash drive containing internal server logs and hidden financial transactions. Elena revealed that Julian Vance wasn't just incompetent. He was actively sabotaging the company's operational infrastructure from within, deliberately driving the stock price down while secretly collaborating with a predatory rival consortium that was preparing a hostile, lowball takeover bid that would strip Caroline of her voting shares and completely liquidate her father's legacy. Before Caroline could fully process the depth of this betrayal, or coordinate a legal response with her personal attorneys, the corporate conspiracy turned violently real on a dark, rain-slicked Thursday evening as she was being driven back to her city apartment after a late strategy meeting. A large, unmarked black SUV deliberately rammed her corporate sedan at a secluded intersection, spinning the vehicle out of control, while a second vehicle blocked the road, prompting her personal security detail, whom she suddenly realized had been hired through a firm recommended by Julian, to abandon the vehicle entirely rather than protect her. Realizing she was walking into a trap designed to force her physical disappearance or her signature on a forced restructuring agreement before the upcoming board vote, Caroline used the chaos of the collision to slide out of the damaged passenger door, scrambling down a dark embankment into a sprawling public park and losing her phone in the process. Terrified, bruised, and realizing she could not trust her security team, her board, or any of her usual contacts in the city, her mind flashed to the one person who had never lied to her, the one man whose absolute integrity had remained unshakable even when she publicly humiliated him. Remembering the address from Travis's final HR severance file, she spent her remaining cash on a series of local buses and a long, exhausting 3-mile walk through the pouring rain along a dark country road, finally arriving at his secluded farmhouse in the middle of the night, where she found the back door unlocked, stepped inside the quiet kitchen, and collapsed onto his bed from sheer emotional and physical exhaustion. 6 hours would pass before the sound of an old pickup truck pulling into the gravel driveway would force these two entirely different worlds to finally collide in the quiet light of a country morning when Caroline woke up in the warm, sunlit bedroom of the farmhouse. The sharp, savory aroma of frying bacon and fresh coffee filtered through the doorway, a sensory reality so far removed from her chaotic corporate life that for a moment she forgot the terrifying events of the previous night. She walked hesitantly into the kitchen, her torn clothes and pale face casting her as a ghost in the warm space, where Travis was standing calmly by the stove, while little Sophie sat at the wooden table, carefully coloring a picture of a horse with a box of worn crayons. Travis looked up, his expression remaining entirely composed, and showing no shock or anger at finding his former billionaire boss hiding in his home. He simply pulled out a heavy oak chair, poured a steaming mug of black coffee, and quietly told his daughter to go play in her room for a little while so the grown-ups could talk. Caroline sank into the chair, her hands shaking as she held the warm mug, and she poured her heart out to the quiet man, explaining Julian's elaborate betrayal, the data manipulation, the hostile takeover timeline, and the terrifying ambush that had forced her to flee the city with nothing but the clothes on her back. Travis listened without interrupting, his sharp eyes focused on her face as he noted every detail, his calm demeanor acting as an anchor that slowly brought the powerful executive back from the brink of total panic. Instead of gloating over her misfortune or reminding her of her past arrogance, Travis simply nodded, stood up, and walked over to his old metal filing cabinet in the corner of the room, pulling out a dusty, leather-bound binder that contained his original structural blueprints and system source codes from 10 years ago. He explained to a stunned Caroline that when he designed the digital core of Hayes Global's logistics network, he had installed a highly secure, independent legacy override protocol, a digital backdoor that could only be accessed through a physical hardline connection, and a specific set of manual master keys that Julian Vance didn't even know existed. For the next 14 hours, Travis transformed his modest kitchen table into a high-powered operations center, utilizing his old engineering laptop and a makeshift satellite internet dish he had set up in his workshop to bypass Julian's corrupted corporate firewalls. Caroline watched in absolute awe as this quiet single father, whom her credentialed vice presidents had dismissed as a simple maintenance worker, navigated the complex, multi-layered security architecture of her company with an effortless, brilliant precision that surpassed any high-priced tech consultant she had ever hired. He systematically recovered the altered access logs, traced the hidden offshore accounts where Julian was receiving kickbacks from the rival consortium, and unlocked the true operational data that proved the company's recent failures were completely manufactured. Exactly 14 hours remained until the emergency meeting of the Hayes Global Board of Directors, where Julian Vance intended to declare Caroline permanently missing and finalize the hostile sale of the company to his co-conspirators. The grand, mahogany-lined boardroom of Hayes Global was packed to absolute capacity the following morning, the atmosphere thick with tension as Julian Vance stood at the head of the long table, wearing a tailored three-piece suit and holding a leather folder containing the final liquidation documents. He was in the middle of a smooth, practiced speech to the anxious board members, expressing deep, manufactured sorrow over the mysterious disappearance of Caroline Hayes, while explaining that immediate corporate survival dictated they sign the company over to the waiting consortium. When the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open with a resounding crash, Caroline Hayes walked into the room, her posture commanding, her eyes flashing with absolute authority, and her presence completely shattering Julian's carefully constructed composure as he staggered backward against the mahogany table, his face turning an ash-white color. But she did not walk in alone. She was accompanied by Travis Reynolds, who was dressed in his simple, clean work shirt and carrying a rugged, industrial flash drive, which he calmly walked forward and inserted into the central media terminal of the boardroom. Before Julian could utter a single word of corporate defense, the massive wall monitors came alive, displaying an undeniable, crystal-clear digital ledger of Julian's financial fraud, his encrypted communications with the predatory buyers, and the physical security logs detailing the premeditated ambush on Caroline's vehicle. The polished corporate climber who had spent years manipulating language to undermine others was completely cornered by the unassailable truth. His elegant vocabulary failing him entirely as federal law enforcement officers, whom Travis had quietly notified hours before, entered the room and placed him in handcuffs, leading him away in front of the very board members he had tried to deceive. Turning to the silent, stunned boardroom, Caroline stood beside Travis and addressed the investors, her voice steady and resonant as she declared that the greatest mistake of her career had been trusting the polished lies of an opportunist while ignoring the brilliant, quiet integrity of the man who had actually built their operational foundation. She announced that she was using her controlling shares to immediately dissolve the current Executive Strategy Committee, publicly restoring Travis Reynolds' name to the company's official history books and offering him the position of Chief Operating Officer with a multi-million-dollar salary and massive stock options. Travis looked at the cheering board members, then turned to Caroline, offering a small, appreciative smile before quietly declining the showy corporate title, stating that his primary duty would always be to his daughter Sophie and his quiet life in the country. Instead, he asked for something far more systemic and meaningful: the creation of an independent, fully funded operational oversight guild, which he would lead from his countryside home, ensuring that frontline workers were given a direct voice to executive leadership, fair compensation, and absolute protection from corporate exploitation. 3 months later, a warm Saturday afternoon found the countryside property filled with a deep, enduring stillness, the old farmhouse surrounded by blooming wildflowers, and the gentle rustle of the oak trees in the summer breeze. Caroline Hayes arrived at the farm without her luxury sedan, her security detail, or her tailored corporate suits, wearing a simple denim jacket and carrying a small box of bakery pastries as she walked up the wooden steps of the porch, where Travis was sitting with a cup of tea while Sophie played with a new puppy in the yard. She sat down in the wooden rocking chair beside him, looking out over the peaceful green hills, a profound sense of contentment replacing the old, frantic anxiety that had driven her life for so many years. She looked at Travis and softly told him that the company had just experienced its most stable, profitable quarter in a decade, not because of new algorithms or budget cuts, but because the workers finally felt heard, valued, and protected by the guild he had created. Travis took a slow sip of his tea, watching his daughter's joyful laughter echo across the field, and he quietly replied that true worth is never measured by the height of an executive tower or the numbers on a stock ticker, but by the safety, trust, and peace we build for the people we love. Has someone in your own life ever been misjudged the way Travis was, written off as ordinary or lesser by people who only looked at a title or a low-status job, before anyone bothered to see the brilliant mind and the golden heart underneath? Tell us about them in the comments below, even if it is just to finally give them the profound credit they have earned from a world that so often looks but never truly sees. If you believe that quiet, overlooked people deserve to be seen, celebrated, and restored, we invite you to subscribe and remain a part of our family here, where we ensure that true worth is never forgotten. Stay for the final truth, and thank you for listening.